What other moves can you see happening between now and the deadline?
Well, that's a good question. I think a lot of NBA teams would like to know that answer. And unfortunately, they don't, because we don't really have a definitive market just yet. I think it's starting to take shape. But the play-in has really kind of squashed the market a little bit, because you have almost, 13 teams roughly in each conference that has a shot to make the play-in still and or the playoffs. So, for instance, as of standings right now, if you look in the loss column, the Mavericks are at 22 losses, and the Phoenix Suns are at 24. The Suns are currently in 12th, and only 2 losses back of the 5th Mavericks, right? You look in the East, similarly, a little bit wider disparity, but the Raptors, Wizards, and even the Magic are within range of the Bulls. Bulls are at 24 losses, Magic at 28. So everyone's sort of bunched up still. And for, like the Celtics just almost won a title. Getting back to the finals and winning, that matters to them. But for like a team like Sacramento, for instance, doing very well this year, just making the playoffs is a huge win for them. So if you say, like, if Orlando had a chance to make the playoffs, maybe they're not going to be a seller. If the Wizards think they can make the playoffs and think they can keep Kyle Kuzma, then they're not going to be a seller. The Raptors, we'll see. The Bulls, it seems like they're not a seller. You start going down the list, there's only a few teams that are actually offering players in trade, and one of them would be Detroit with Bojan Bogdanovic, the Rockets with Eric Gordon, the Spurs with Jakob Poeltl. But from what I've been told, the Hornets are not even active yet, potentially in the trade market, waiting until February to sort of get that ball rolling. So it's the play-in slowing down the market that has sort of left us sort of wondering, when is this thing going to pick up?
Yeah, we are wondering. We're wondering with bated breath. But I guess it is what it is. We'll just have to be patient.
Right. So you had mentioned the Raptors being worse than what everyone kind of predicted them to be, which it sucks. But there's whispers and rumors, especially up here in the Great White North, that a couple teams are interested in Fred VanVleet. One of those teams being Orlando Magic and another one being the Pelicans. Can you see those two teams having a bidding war for Fred VanVleet, or is this just kind of agents stirring the pot? Well,
no, I mean, I wrote about Orlando back in December, early December, being an interested party in VanVleet. So we talked earlier about how there are very few sellers. And Chicago I kind of use as an example of the opposite of Toronto, where both teams are not as good as they should be. But Chicago, to sort of accept that they're not very good and to start selling off pieces, the general manager pretty much needs to acknowledge that everything he's done over the last 3 or 4 years has been for naught. Like, it hasn't produced enough. And so it's sort of difficult to keep your job when you say, everything I've done didn't work. I mean, it's the right thing to do from a basketball point of view. It's the wrong thing to do from a keep your job point of view. And so I bring that up in reference to the Raptors, because you don't have that issue with Masai. He's got the kind of latitude and track record and, just reputation for what he's already accomplished. And if the team has run its course and it's decision time, whether or not you're going to pay to keep Fred VanVleet, whether you're going to keep Gary Trent, both of them can leave. And then the next year, both OG Anunoby and Siakam are going into the last years of their deals. Generally speaking, unless you're keeping them, you want to trade around now. You don't want to trade in the last year if you can avoid it, because the market is just usually softer on a player that can be a free agent in a year. And unless you know you're going to extend them, it's a risk of taking a player who might leave, so you might not give up enough. In other words, if a team traded for Siakam next trade deadline, maybe you get him for 3 or 4 months and then he leaves, and what did you accomplish? So you don't give as much to Toronto in a year's time, but maybe to finish off this year and then try to work him in next year and work towards the future. That's an interesting possibility. So I think, unlike the Bulls, I think the Raptors are in a position where they have the leadership that can afford to say, okay, it's time to, let's look at Scotty Barnes as our future. Let's try to get pieces around him. Make a decision first on VanVleet and Trent, who can leave sooner, Maybe if there's real opportunity to get out of Anunoby or Siakam, or at least negotiate with them to get a sense of where they are long term, because even though an extension might not work right now, it might work over the summer or at a later date. So it might be, you just don't want to just panic and dump good players. At the same time, you don't want to keep good players and then watch them leave. So once they hit free agency. So there are a lot of eyes around the league on Toronto, hoping that they'll look to go in the other direction. But they've been linked to other players that are more adds and not subtracts. Like they're in the rumor mill, they're a team looking at like maybe a Bogdanovich or someone else like that. And who knows what path they go and if they make those kind of moves. But it doesn't sound yet like they're ready to pull the plug. But I think that it's a possibility. And if they do, they're going to have, I would say they would ask a very steep price for their players.
For sure. I feel like that price would be almost ludicrous, but also as a Toronto fan, I would like to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all surprised to see the Raptors in the position that they are. They came to the season as a potential top 6, and they could still finish as a top 6 team, but right now it's certainly not looking like that with the current roster. But that's basketball, as they say. Now, Eric, you have a strong focus with the LA teams, as you live out that way on the Best Coast, and you also dabble in a little bit of fantasy. So just to switch gears for a little bit, we see with the Clippers that Kawhi doesn't play back-to-backs, usually has one game off. Paul George is often injured. What are your thoughts on Terrence Mann, both from a basketball perspective and a fantasy perspective?
Well, the Clippers are sort of looking at their options when it comes to point guards. So it's not a negative risk opportunity because they may not fill that, right? So we don't know what the trade deadline is going to mean. He's not necessarily a huge stat guy under normal circumstances, right? Like, I like Terrence Mann, but he's not necessarily somebody who's going to get you massive numbers, but he's going to spike here and there, and he might be spiking right now. So if I had Terrence Mann, I might be looking to trade him to somebody who thinks he's going to stay at that spike when he may not. And that's just, I like to sell early when it comes to those sort of things. I'd rather trade earlier than too late. So he had a 31-point game. He had a 12-point game, 8-point, 12, 14. That's about as good as it's going to get for Terrence Mann. And selling high would be the way to go, in my opinion, because I do think the Clippers are looking for a trade to add. I mean, they've been looking at Mike Conley, Fred VanVleet, even point guard, a veteran point guard with experience. Makes a lot of sense for them. Somebody who can distribute the ball, play some defense, and just be smart. Not to say John Wall isn't that, but I just don't think the fit hasn't particularly worked very well. So he's hurt. And even if they don't, Wall does come back at some point from an injury after a couple weeks. Plus Reggie Jackson. Both of those gentlemen could eat into Reggie Jackson's numbers. So just my take. I'd be more of a seller than a buyer. That's just an opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, Eric. I'm definitely a seller when the value is at its peak, in my opinion. For example, Onyeka Okongwu has had a great January. He's had a pretty good December as well with Clint Capella's absence. Capella's back. He's dominating in the paint, and that's someone I'm probably going to look to sell from now on. Now, Eric, is there any chance that Wiseman ends up in Toronto?
Well, I mean, any chance is pretty broad, right? You know what I mean?
Is it like a better chance than, say Anthony Davis staying healthy throughout the season? Like, is it realistic?
Well, what the Warriors tell teams is that they're not trading their young guys. So if that changes, it changes in the last couple of weeks or the week before the deadline. A lot of teams will say they should, and if you're the Raptors and you want to get out of players who it's time to move on from and add to a young core, that's certainly, they're one of the few teams that could they offer the money would be complicated, but a Van Vliet, a Siakam, a Trent, Anunoby, whatever, to the Warriors, matching the money would be very difficult to get to a Siakam. But if it was Anunoby, shoot, I mean, I could argue that for the Warriors. I don't know where they are with budget and whatnot, but you can certainly argue it. I haven't heard any reason to think that the Warriors are going to go in that direction. I just know a lot of people think they should.
Okay, cool.